All right, my name is Sean Fallon, and you're listening to episode 25, Star Trek The Next Generation. Welcome to From First to Last. Hello again, and welcome again. My name is Sean Fallon. This is From First to Last. Today, my guest, he's a writer for Hotchka.com, and he's the host of the podcast Nerd Punches Nerd. He is Jeremy Fogelman. How are you today, Jeremy?
All right, yeah. It's a decent weather over here in Washington, D.C. That's in the
Yes.
that's in the U.S. U.S. of America. Just for anyone who might not be aware.
Yeah, just in case. It happens.
Yeah.
I don't know what the weather is like. It's, what time is it? It's 6 a.m. in Australia. The sun is just rising off there, just outside my window, which is lovely. It's good. It's a good time to get up in the morning in Australia, just before all the weird tropical birds start. Jeremy, what show did you choose for us today?
So I picked Star Trek The Next Generation.
Excellent. So I guess this is a bit of a weird one in terms of this show, because so Star Trek Next Generation ran from 1987 to 1994, and there was 178 episodes. But obviously there's also movies, spin-offs, video games, comic books, there's the original Star Trek, there's the rebooted Star Trek, there's so on and so on and so on. So we'll try and stick as much as we can to Next Generation, but if you find yourself veering off into other iterations of the franchise, don't worry about it. So we'll start with Jeremy. What's your experience with Star Trek: The Next Generation?
So when it was first on, I was not permitted to watch the show.
Okay.
I think at that age I was only allowed to watch educational programming, your Sesame Streets or Reading Rainbows and the like. Right. So I didn't start watching Star Trek until when it was well on into the series. So I would kind of got introduced to the characters just sort of piecemeal as I just happened to catch things, because this was before the days of, DVR. So if you caught it, you caught it. Maybe you could try to record it onto a VCR or something, but maybe not. And that was sort of how I started watching, and I had just happened to catch a few here and there. I definitely missed some of what are now considered to be the real classic episodes. And because I didn't know to look out for that stuff. I wasn't immersed in the Star Trek community of any type. I was just a kid, so I didn't really know that kind of stuff. And I think I had caught some of the original series on TV, and I thought, this is kind of cheesy. And it was just I'll pass on that. But I did like the characters. I think I can actually tell you, I know exactly when I first learned about it. It was a Reading Rainbow episode in which LeVar Burton was doing a behind the scenes of Star Trek The Next Generation. He's like, hey, this is cool. And I was able to convince my parents to let me watch the show. He's like, hey, come on. I know it's sciencey, right? Educational.
Yeah. It's on Reading Rainbow.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's cool.
So that's what happened. And so my entry point was the Reading Rainbow entry point. And I caught episodes here and there were definitely pieces that I just was like, I don't understand what's happening here. And there were definitely references to earlier episodes that at the time I was just like, whatever. But I watched a bunch of it, and as it turned out, my dad was pretty into a lot of the show too, although I didn't know that at the time. He had been watching a lot of it. I remember when the series finale was coming on in 93, it was like, we gotta record that because this is the finale. It was a big deal, and I remember I watched that finale when it was on, and it was like, oh, this is such a big deal. We were really careful to make sure that we actually recorded it just in case. We didn't want to lose it. And then, later on, as things became more available, especially when it came down to things like Netflix, I rewatched a lot more. Now, I have not seen the entire series, because there are some episodes, especially early on, that are kind of notoriously not good. But I've still seen a lot of them, a lot of the episodes. By this
That's
point, I
cool.
have seen all of the what are considered the good ones.
Yeah, I mean that is the thing. I think you can't like. I did notice that this week when I was doing a bit of research, and there's a lot of lists online that are like the essential next generation episodes, like
Mm-hmm.
and ones you need to skip. Um, yeah, no, I think I I don't know how I came in because I remember when I was a kid, like seeing all the like the original Star Trek movies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like my parents, like whenever they came out, they'd always like go to the video shop and get them. I remember that, and then like Next Generation, there was a thing where I think it must have been once the show had finished or when it was just in syndication or whatever. So in England, every night, Monday to Friday, I think it would be something like 5 o'clock till 6 o'clock would be Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then 6 o'clock till 7 o'clock would be The Simpsons. So that
Oh,
was sort of like after school. It would tend to be with Next Generation. I wouldn't watch it from the start. I would just sort of put it on early to make sure I didn't miss The Simpsons. So for Next Generation, there's probably like 100 of these episodes. I've seen like the last 10 minutes. So I've
oh,
probably just seen a lot of like the end of action sequences or the moment where Picard
like
outthinks his enemy.
yeah,
That's it. That's all I've seen
like
over
the
and over
wrap
again.
up. Oh,
Yeah.
Q, we've bested you again. Oh, Mon Capitan. Until next time. It's like, well, I don't
Yeah.
know what happened, but I'm glad he got him.
Yeah, good. It's happy ending. I've probably just seen a lot of like Picard saying, "No, you've underestimated humanity," and then just whatever comes from that, and then
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, I have seen like that's pretty much my whole Star Trek thing. Like a lot of bits and pieces. Like I've seen a couple of episodes of DS9, a couple of episodes of Voyager. I don't think I ever watched Enterprise. Actually, I don't think I ever saw any of that.
Well,
But Next
mm,
Generation sort of falls in the because I was born in '84, so this is like this show finished by the time I was 10 years old. So
right.
this sort of falls into probably what I would have seen the most. Like this would have been when I was watching the most TV, like just
Yeah.
during the week, like watching it, whatever. And well, a weird thing that happened to me was when I was at university. I went to university at a place called Huddersfield in
Mm-hmm.
Yorkshire, and it's near to where Patrick Stewart's from. So he was
Oh,
made
okay.
the chancellor of my university. So when I graduated, when I went on stage to pick up my diploma, Patrick Stewart gave it to me. Like he shook my hand and said, "Well done, Sean," and handed me my diploma,
Mm.
which was
Ugh.
pretty good, as you can
That's
imagine.
nice. I have to say that's a nice little little
Yeah,
connection there. Yeah.
that was
Yeah. He
cool.
could definitely make you feel like, oh, you've earned this. Good work.
Oh, 100%. Like, just like, yeah, walked over he had a big beaming smile. Well done, Sean. I was like, holy shit. So that was pretty good.
Well, he's got that great voice. I used to joke that when you were watching episodes that were not necessarily the strongest, he could
Hmm.
sell like the stupid ideas,
Yeah.
like Mr. Wolf, prepare the lollipop cannons, and you're like, yes, oh, brilliant, do it. And if you were like reading a novelization of that episode, you're like, this is so stupid. Why,
Yeah.
why did I think this was a good episode? I guess that
Yeah,
is like
that was.
another.
Yeah.
I think I've read a lot of those varying in quality of Star Trek books
Uh
because they're
huh.
all written by different people. So considering all the writers are not equal quality, they don't always get the characters quite right. But
Yeah.
when you're starving for any kind of entry point and they're not necessarily rerunning, and the library has a bunch of free books randomly
Yeah.
about Star Trek, it's like, oh, I'll just read more of these. So
Yeah, that's it.
I did a lot of that too. I mean, Q is definitely, a big character for me. He's always been one of my favorites.
Hmm.
And, that sort of ties into the choice of, because they tie it into like the first and the last episode of the series.
Yeah, no, that was great. It's very interesting, like the first and last of this, how sort of close they are in terms of events and stuff. Like, well, to talk about that, how was your experience watching this first episode for this podcast? Like watching it again and watching it, like trying to analyze it and think about what was good and what was bad. How was the episode for you?
So of course, I had seen it when it was first on. I probably didn't see the pilot in its entirety until maybe 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my perspective is I don't feel like my opinions are necessarily colored by nostalgia other than just my connection to the characters. But, like, the episode itself, I hadn't seen. So, I think there's definitely some rough pieces to it, but I still really like the pilot. I think it does a good job of sort of setting up the characters. I think, they didn't quite have all of them down exactly.
Yeah.
But I liked it. I liked the resolution as well. It might seem a little, cliched now, but this was 87. So I think it's not really fair to necessarily judge the story, considering the Star Trek itself has already copied those types of ideas so many times. Whereas at the time, it was like, I think they were trying to make a statement about evolving past, brutalism and just the let's just fight, which was a big thing from the original series. And I was reading some of the oral history of Star Trek and some of the stuff from the TNG Bible. And it was interesting just because apparently Gene Roddenberry at that point had gotten to a little bit of a dictatorship almost in a lot of ways. He was notoriously sexist and sometimes racist to people. And there was a huge amount of writer turnover in the first season. But in contrast to that, the cast gelled really well. Like, they just felt like, later on they always said, like, that was the best time we ever had, despite, the rough start. And, it's interesting just because, you see, like, there are elements of trying to be progressive there for sure. And it's almost like there's still a little tinge of, like, not quite getting it for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we're trying to say, oh yeah, men and women, it's an equality of of genders, but then you look at, like, the description, he's like, oh, but she has a very female form in, like, the description. It's like, okay, well, that's a little
It's a little bit weird.
it's like, in the same, like, paragraph you're saying, yeah, well, men and women are equal in this time period, but he can't help but notice she has a striptease walk, and that is a direct quote from the Bible that was written by Gene Roddenberry about Beverly Crusher, that she has a striptease walk. Now, I never particularly noticed this so-called striptease walk when I've seen the show. I don't know, maybe I haven't seen enough stripteases to recognize it.
That's the problem.
But I guess, I saw Voyager essentially from beginning to end. I saw almost all of Deep Space Nine from beginning to end. And I tried watching Enterprise and then gave up.
Yeah.
But my feeling is Deep Space Nine has the best average quality, and I think Next Generation has some of the best individual episodes. I mean, it's sort of like, I think there are too many bad episodes in TNG for it to really be my favorite series. This isn't just my personal opinion, obviously.
No, of course.
There are definitely people who disagree. And I'm not really, like, I guess, as hardcore as some people are about some of the things. I mean, there are plot holes and stuff that I don't really care about.
Yeah.
It's not really as important to me. I like, the character interplay. I like the kind of dealing with interesting sci-fi ideas to try to tell you something about, us as humans.
Yeah.
And that's sort of like that's one of the reasons I always sort of like the Star Trek thing. Star Wars was it was something I liked too, but it was very, romantic. It's a fantasy, and there's definitely room for that kind of thing. But Star Trek was always more like looking inward. What is even like in the first 2 seasons, there was an episode about Data where they were trying to determine, is he property or is he a sentient being? It's sort of like an interesting thing about a metaphor for racism as well that was definitely a lot better than the black and white aliens from the original series, where it was a little
guys.
Well, listen, when you look back at it, it seems kind of like ugh. I think that's why I feel like, even with the things that don't work as well with TNG, I think a lot of it still holds up. I think that, you look at some of the interplay. I think the introduction of Q is something that could have really been screwed up.
Yeah.
The idea of like a omnipotent being, but over the course of the series, they had different episodes where he came in and he would have interactions with the crew, and for the most part, they were almost all pretty great episodes, with like very interesting,
Yeah.
sort of explorations of humanity. And I always liked their interplay. John Delancey, he's so great. He has such
Yeah.
like the Loki trickster,
Yeah.
charisma. I always really like that.
No, it's that character is awesome, and it is very. I was just thinking that when I was watching the episode. It's very bold to have him in the very first episode as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like it isn't because you can think to yourself, okay, well we've rebooted Star Trek or we've made a sequel to Star Trek, so we probably should show that we still we still got the chops and we can still make Star Trek. But this episode is very much it does have a bit of a showcase of different sort of Star Trekky things, but to open with like brand new captain and then Q appears and he appears as like Christopher Columbus, doesn't he? You know what I mean? And that's
Yeah.
I can imagine in '87 you would have been like, "What the fuck am I watching?" And
Yeah.
sort of I think that's very brave and very bold. And by the time you get to the end of the episode, like you say, they have sort of established a tone and a bit of a language and a thing of like, yeah, the original Star Trek was a bit more of Kirk punching out aliens. This is going to be more humanist and more sort of thoughtful, I guess, would be one term
Yeah.
for it. But at the same time, we also know how to do action if we need it. Like I think that
Right.
was very interesting.
Right, yeah, they did the whole saucer separation. They wanted to show off some of their,
Yeah,
new capabilities. I assume you probably saw it like on Netflix or something, which has the
yeah,
remastered version. So it looks better than it did when it was first on the air, because they were able to go back and get like a lot of the original proofs and like remaster some of the special effects. So I think it's still one of the reasons it still looks good is because they were able to do that.
yeah,
Uh, I think that there was only one effect in the pilot that like knocked me out for like a second, which is in the end when the alien is coming out of the planet. There was a little off center thing I saw. I was like,
yeah.
oh, that's a little jarring. But for the most part, I thought it was pretty good.
No, it looked great. Like you say, all the sort of external spaceship stuff. It's like, yeah, no, this looks really good. Which I do remember, like when I would catch it on TV, in the '90s, it always looked that little bit shonky. Like it was
Yeah.
always a little bit not quite right. But no, I mean, yeah, like you say, they've gone back and remastered. I did watch it on Netflix, and yeah, no, it looked great, and it's such like I think going back to Patrick Stewart from before, it's fascinating. Like from moment one, it feels like you say, everyone else is trying to find their feet and they haven't quite got it together. But from the first second, he is acting everyone else off the screen.
Oh no,
Like
he's
he's
so
giving it all.
he's so good. I think that the second person in terms of acting capability is probably Brent Spiner.
Mm,
I mean,
yeah,
I think LeVar Burton is good. I actually do think, Michael Dorn as Worf is pretty good. Also, it's kind of a thankless role. I mean, I remember
yeah,
there are a lot of little character beats that were like I kind of forgotten, like where Worf, when Q appears on the screen, Worf goes to shoot it. It's like Scar's like, "What are you? Come on, what are you going to
yeah,
blast a hole in the screen?" I thought that was pretty
yeah.
good. I liked Data. He's like, "That's a joke. Fascinating."
Yeah, that's
I like that. Even if there were little things that he like got better at, like contractions and little continuity errors and stuff that they were just like playing around with, that they got a little bit better at later. I think
yeah,
you had pieces of things. I mean, even like Troy, who was kind of the worst written character on the show.
yeah,
She got to like do some like interesting acting things in the pilot. Even if her character was kind of not used the best over the course of the show, and it was sort of like a lot of it was just like, hey, what kind of like skimpy outfits can we put her in? Was a big thing.
okay,
That was Unfortunately, that was a common thing for a lot of the Star Trek stuff. They sort of felt like we got to do like cheesecake stuff because that's what people want.
Yeah, that's what people come to Star Trek for: striptease walks and skimpy outfits.
So I guess a question I would want to ask you is like, did you have like an aversion to Wesley Crusher? Because I know he's considered to be like very annoying, but I guess maybe because I watched the episodes out of order, I never really cared that much. I didn't find him that annoying.
I think yeah, he was quite annoying, but I could see his purpose like straight away, like when it was the idea that like Picard had brought his dead father home and all that kind of stuff. I think it was. I can imagine if you were like I guess a Star Trek purist or something, it's probably feeling as though they're trying to cater for children viewers or whatever. But I mean, he did what he did. He wasn't that annoying. He was just a kid. Like kids are pretty annoying, like. But it didn't. It wasn't like he came on the show and I was just like sickened by it. Like it was like it was what it was. Yeah. No, I mean, and I think like what you say with everyone else, they're not given much to work with, but they do their best with what they've got. Like I think Troy has her moments. Sometimes you're just like, all she has to do is just sort of look dreamily off to the distance and be like, pain, and that sort of thing. Like, that's tough. That's tough for that actress.
Yeah, trying to sell that is not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of. I think that they had some stuff that they did with Tasha Yar. She was supposed to have come from like a colony, where she was like in Skeepy, which was like not under Starfleet, so it was actually had crime and bad things and stuff like that. But it never seemed like they really did much with that over the course of the show. And then eventually she left, so she was written out by getting killed by a slime monster. But then again, they did have a later episode, which I believe was called Yesterday's Enterprise, where they come back because they have like the parallel universe one, and that's a brilliant episode, and she got a chance to come back to do that. I don't want, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to give away the twist on it, but that's definitely a lot of the time travel stuff, especially later on. Sometimes the time travel stuff got stupid, especially later on. Sometimes there was definitely some Voyager episodes where I was thinking, I thought like this is kind of campy, and I can kind of like enjoy it for a campiness, but they didn't. It was always just like, oh, this is just silly. But I often found like a lot of the stuff that they did in TNG were really kind of interesting takes on this kind of thing. And the truth is, I have to say, like, when I first saw the finale, I was definitely a bit of a mind screw. I did not understand it when I first saw it. I was like, wait, what? What happened? So it took me a little while to get to like, for my own mind to expand. I can tell you, there's only one part of the pilot I feel like is, I guess you could call it problematic.
Yeah.
Which is that there's an actor who's a little person who's dressed in kind of like Fu Manchu style makeup, and it was like, like it was like, this doesn't seem quite right. And
he had like the drawn on mustache, and he had the little dung, like, oh god, this is not great.
Yeah, right. So the guy who was the bailiff is actually I recognized him. He was the villain from Mortal Kombat. I don't know if you ever saw that.
That's who he is. Yeah, I was like, oh, where do I know you from, dude? Yeah, of course. He's Shang
Tsung.
Thank you. That was it. I knew it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, the actor I was talking about is Joe Geeb, I believe is how I say it, and he's just one of these little person character actors, and it was just like, he didn't have any lines, he just rang a bell. And it was just like, it was exactly the reason why in the finale, when they brought back some of that stuff, they did not include that guy again.
They learned the mistake.
Like, oh, maybe that was a little offensive.
Yeah, I got that. It was. I did like the fact in the episode how Picard wasn't like everyone's best friend. He was like putting people through their paces and like him and Riker, it wasn't like straight away like this
Right.
huge respectful relationship. He kind of like Picard's not a dick to him, but he does sort of like he makes him do the manual like getting the saucer back on the other part of the ship and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of yeah, I mean he does tell people off quite a lot, and like you say that whole thing with when Worf points the blaster at the phaser at the screen, and he does take a moment to be like, Worf, what were you about to do? Oh, you're gonna shoot? Just actually dresses him down, like I thought that was really good, like. Because if Picard told you to do something, like if he was angry with you, it'd be devastating.
Yeah, well, exactly. He's
Yeah.
got he had that presence even back in the pilot for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say it is interesting to sort of see the episodes side by side because when I first saw the finale, it was like, wow, oh yeah, everyone looks the same. But now, watching it in like, remastered high def, it's like, oh no, they don't look, they do look a few years older. And it's not like they look like ancient or anything. Like, for example, some of the old age makeup is a little bit more than, say, they actually are in real life, and we're about 25 years or so, almost.
Yeah.
Since
And Patrick Stewart looks
there.
exactly the same.
Well, yes,
No.
and Jonathan Frakes doesn't look like bedraggled with like white hair.
Yeah. 25 years seems like such a long time in space. Like Worf is like looks like Doc Brown from Back to the Future. Just like big cascading grey hair.
Yeah, well, it was great. Although Data, I think Data, he was so great in that finale, just with the gray hair that he has exactly down the middle. Just
Yeah.
with the and his maid is like, oh, just he looks like a skunk. Just
Yeah.
but
Cheerful.
yeah, I mean, one of the things I noticed when rewatching the finale now is how good Patrick Stewart is in it. Really,
Yeah.
playing three different versions of the same character, and I just was like, all these little touches, these little like when they cut between the different timelines, and they cut in similar ways so
Yeah.
that you're moving. They have like the similar, movements and everything. And one of the times when he comes back and he pulls the hat off his head, and then he like looks down and he realizes, why am I wearing a hat?
Yeah.
I thought that was great. I also liked when he first is in the past and he sees Data. Data's like he doesn't understand the burning the midnight oil. He's like,
oil,
what is
yeah.
the etymology of that idiom? He's like, and then he's like, oh yes, Mr. Data, it's it's like, oh, I guess we'll have to ignite the midnight petroleum. And Picard has that look of like the smile of like, oh yeah, this is how it used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's very good, and like you say, Brett Spiner does really well as well to be like the three different versions of Data. So like the fully realized one, somewhere in the middle, and then like you say that first one where he is a bit of a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
He's sort of like No, I mean Patrick Stewart's amazing. Like this was quite interesting actually with this first and last one, because the first one I thought it was okay, but it kind of left me a bit cold. There were some moments where I was a bit bored. This last episode, though, blew me away. Just utterly fantastic. I was really, really into it.
Yeah.
Just, just so good. And like, as it got closer to the end and it started, and he worked, like, Picard sort of worked it out, and it'd be like, future Data would tell him something, and then it would like cut, and he'd be in the past, and he'd be like, Data, why don't we do this? And that whole thing of them all helping each other and like cutting across, I was like, oh my god, this is really, really good and really well written.
Yeah, that was
it's such a tightrope. Yeah.
It was very. I loved how he would take Data's quantum advanced temporal theory to the past, and the present Data's like, oh,
Yeah.
what a fascinating hypothesis.
Yeah.
That was it was interesting. They had the three different crews in different configurations. And
Yeah.
I think there's only one weird piece of it which they even call out in the episode. I don't know. It's kind of like a plot hole, in that they say like there's supposed to be like the inverse tachyon pulse, which is some delightful technobabble doublespeak.
Yeah.
But where it's supposedly they're saying it comes from three different enterprises, but it actually came from the Pasteur, the future medical ship.
Yeah.
And even like they say it in the episode where Picard is like he's trying to explain, it was 300. No, wait, no, it was a Pasteur. It's like, yeah, you called it out in the episode, and it was a little weird, like because they said at one point, oh, it's the same amplitude. It's like they came from 3 enterprises. Like, well, if you had just said it's 3 different, inverse tachyon beams without having to get into they're the same, then there wouldn't be that little plot hole that they mention in the episode. It's like maybe they got to that scene, you're like, oh crap, we don't have time to rewrite the whole episode. Patrick, why don't you just add? We're gonna have a little line here where you just call it out, right? Okay, we're covered. Yeah, I mean,
that's fine. No one's gonna notice.
Well, I mean, some people obviously noticed. Yeah, but that was great. The slowly building of, is it all in his head, and then it's clearly not all in his head as the episode progresses, and Q gets to like really like vamp it up a lot, and just it sort of reveals like he's kind of like helping him out, and I like that too.
That was cool.
And there were all these, all those little like things where he would show up and then just like trying to like help him out. And I realized in the pilot he actually did a little bit of that too. Like at the end, he was like, yeah, come on, shoot them. And it's clearly he's trying to like say it in like kind of reverse psychology, like, come on, don't shoot them, obviously.
Yeah, you can't trust me, so don't do what I'm telling you to do.
Yeah, so I like that, and even if they had a more realized relationship later on, after they'd already been through various little adventures and stuff, I think, I did appreciate how, even if Q is kind of a pain, he was like, he didn't really want Picard to be erased from existence.
Yeah.
So he was sort of like there kind of helping him out, and I like that piece of it too. And it's sort of like, it's such a weird concept, the idea that this sort of temporal anomaly goes back in time and screws up the building blocks of life because of temporal stuff. They can't move forward in time or whatever, and it's like, well, okay, I guess everyone's kind of screwed because you're probably not going to have any Vulcans or Klingons either, I would bet. So it's sort of it's such an odd take on it, in that they're saying like, you're going to be the one to cause this, in like this really weird paradox, which is like, it's just such an odd situation. It seems like what Q had did was essentially give him the ability to perceive the different time periods in part, so that he could actually influence it. He could make a change. Like that seemed to be, this is what he did. And then that was what made the change. And
like he wasn't going to hold his hand, but sort of point him in the right direction and sort of like, this is what's going to happen. And I can give you some clues, but you're going to have to work it out in the most confusing way possible, because you're going to be jumping from time, and I'm not going to really help you with that. Yeah. But you'll work it out. And also, the future you might be mad. So be aware.
The first time I saw the finale, when he starts like seeing all those like screaming people yelling at him, I was like, what are these things? Until I saw the pilot years later, I did not understand what they were, and then I was like, oh, it's just a callback. It's like, it wasn't trying to be overly confusing. It was actually just a simple callback, and it makes perfect sense. I just didn't.
It makes perfect sense now.
But when you see it out of context like that, having not seen the pilot, even at that point, I had seen Q episodes, but those other spectators were only in the pilot. So you see it in the finale. I'm like, what are they? And I kind of like, I guess they're there to like tell him he's doing the wrong thing. I don't really understand what the court was. Of course, in the pilot, they explain exactly what the court was. So, in retrospect, it makes sense. I was reading that, apparently they tried very hard to replicate the look of like how the ship used to be and how that courtroom used to be. And they couldn't do it exactly because they had like recarpeted the entire ship and done like repairs and stuff over time. So instead they just like, they gave everyone, like, they didn't change, for example, Worf's makeup, which had gotten better. But they gave him the old uniform instead. They added a little business up, like some things that are hanging on the walls that used to be there. Yeah. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it was good as well. Like, you could, even though, like, the sort of the two middle time, like the past and I guess the present time periods were quite samey. But I never felt confused. I always knew exactly where I was. Like, and like you say, it was the subtle things. It was people's shirts I think Worf doesn't he have like a red shirt in the first episode and a yellow in the past and a yellow shirt in the present or something like that.
Well,
And
other way
it
around,
was
but
other way around.
I
But
mean,
yeah, that's a
I just saw it last night, so I have a pretty good memory
Okay.
of it. Yeah, I mean, it was just one of those like, I know exactly where they are. It takes you
Yeah.
maybe like, at first they go through the same kind of like disorientation with you, where you're like, I
Yeah,
don't know
yeah.
what's going on here. Where is he? Why does he have that great beard? And
Yeah.
I thought so, and it was just great at the end when they did all the future stuff. How it was clear all these character moments where it's connecting their whole history together, and Data's like we'll get to the bottom of this, and Geordi is like he's like the compassionate guy who's just like she's just trying to like help out. Riker's still kind of like hot headed, and
Yeah.
like Worf, I loved Picard's blatant manipulation of him. He's like, oh, so you're not going to help us out?
Yeah.
The Worf I remember used to be honorable, but I guess you've changed. He's like, ugh, you always know how to use that against me. He's like, yeah, because it works, because you are honorable. And it's like, well, all right.
Okay then.
It's sort of like, well, see, it's a compliment when you put it like that.
Yeah.
So
No,
I like that a lot.
Yeah, no, I think as well. Like Patrick Stewart looks like he's having the time of his life, like future Picard. Because
Oh,
there's a point
yeah.
where someone says something about oh, we've got to cross the border, so we need a Klingon to get us through. And Picard goes, yes, that's it, Worf. And he's just like absolutely so excited.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, Patrick Stewart's just having the time of his life, like just
Yeah.
really getting into it.
Yeah,
It's great.
He plays like future Picard so well, and like
Yeah.
just the way he talks, he's changed his speaking pattern, and just like the way he moves, like as in like an older person. It's just like it was just such a great piece of acting from someone who's just a great actor in general.
Yeah.
And it's not like there aren't very good actors in a lot of these Star Trek shows. I think that in general, the various captains have all been good actors. Not always the best writing. Like Scott Bakula was often given
Yeah.
really terrible writing on Enterprise. But like I think Kate Mulgrew, who was on Voyager, she was good. Avery Brooks on DA Space Nine played Cisco.
Yeah.
He was really good. It's like there's no like bad performances here. And especially at the end, because these guys have already worked together for so long, for so many years. They're like, this is it. This is our last time. Of course, they did have the movies after that, but
Yeah.
at the time, it felt like a really fitting coda. I really liked even the last scene where
Yeah.
Picard goes in to play poker with them, and he's like, sky's the limit, and it's just like humanity. It's connecting with people,
Yeah.
and that's it's sort of like he's learned this lesson about himself. He doesn't want to be lonely. He wants to connect
Yeah.
with people, and it's sort of like and that's actually a good like bookend to even the pilot, where he's all so standoffish and he has difficulty dealing with everybody. He's like this explorer, lonely, that they even mention the great explorers are often very lonely, and
Yeah.
over the course of the series he kind of gets better at that. I was reading this interview with Patrick Stewart, and he was saying when he first got on to the show, he was always sort of like the stick in the mud. It's like, we're here to work, people. And
Yeah.
whereas everyone else was having fun with it, and he said that they really taught me how not to just be an ass.
Yeah.
So they're all all the people from that show, they're like, say, this was like the best set I ever worked on, type of thing. It's the kind of stuff you hear from the Firefly people, for example. When they look back on that stuff. And sure, we didn't see Wesley Crusher in the finale, but I guess I didn't think about that.
Oh yeah, no, he wasn't in it, was he at all?
I think part of the problem, is you can't have him as the young Wesley Crusher.
Oh yeah.
So you'd have to have him, and doing a future one would be weird, because how are you gonna, how are you gonna make him look older?
Yeah.
And I think so. But they brought back, Tasha, and that was good.
Yeah.
And she was just like, oh, it's back. I loved it. Like, even when they go to the past and he's like, red alert, and everyone's looking at each other like, what's going on? And she's like, go, you heard him.
Yeah. She's like, yeah, she'll just, yeah, loyal and follows orders and a good soldier and all that. And there was good things as well. I like that when Picard's giving commands to Worf, and Tasha's like, whoa, no, that's my job.
Right, because he's used to.
He's getting himself mixed up. Like,
yeah.
But no, I think it was a great, like, I do like a finale like that sort of shows you what's going to happen after the show. So even though that sort of future timeline may not occur, I imagine if you were a big fan of the show, it would be interesting to be like, oh, okay, so Data ends up at Cambridge and Riker ends up as the Admiral, and this sort of idea of what could happen and where these characters could go. I think that's a great one for a finale.
Yeah, there was actually a reference that I had not seen before when Geordi mentions that his wife is named Leia. That was a character on the show that he had like. There was an interesting thing going on with this Dr. Leia Brahms, and she was married in the show, but he kind of like fell in love with a holographic version of her, and then he met the real version, and it was kind of awkward. And so that was like, and I totally missed that, and the several times I've seen the finale before. It's like, in this future, I guess she broke up with her husband and married Geordi. That's interesting. Because there's no reason that they would say Leia and not have it refer to that character. It just, it has to be her. And I guess I just missed it when I've seen it before. Obviously, the first time I saw it, I when you're watching it's like, you're going to miss things. Like, I definitely missed having subtitles where, it's like, what did you say? I mean, even like when you first see Geordi, he's like, Captain, we got a problem with the warp coil, phase inducers, or some other damn thing. And it's just like, it seems like he's talking about his own lines in the show.
He's commenting on his own dialogue.
Yeah, well, it's like, I always say such stupid things on this show. Technobabble was always like, it was kind of like fun for me, but it was never like, that wasn't what drew me in. It was,
no.
It was the characters put in the sci-fi situation, and then you can invent whatever kind of, whatever gobbledygook you need to get things done, and that's fine, And the people, they solve problems. Yeah, they said, oh, we're going to create a static warp shell. And I was like, okay, great.
Cool.
But what it really is about, like, sacrifice. So it doesn't matter the specific terms that they use to, save humanity. It matters that he's saying, I'm pushing 3 different versions of the same crew to sacrifice, one of whom doesn't know why I'm doing it because I'm worried about the timeline, which is such an interesting concept. And he kind of never gets into that too much. There's like only like one line where he says, I'm not going to tell the people in the past about it because I don't want to impact the future. Yeah. Which is sort of interesting because the future timeline and the present one both know about it. So that was like an interesting thing because he had to do his like speech of like, hey, I believe in you guys. You've trusted me so far. This is very important. And I think, obviously when they go in there and they see the other 2 Enterprises, like, well, I guess he was right because that's really weird. So, I think he's clearly shown to be right in those sense. But, it's interesting to have that leap of faith, I really like that. I like, the point is, humanity is more than just trying to go out there and just like, hey, let's just do some cool stuff. I really like the message of Q saying, you're expanding your mind, you're looking within and not just without. You try to resolve this time paradox. It didn't really make sense. And when you were able to grasp even just a piece of that, you were able to stop it from happening. I really like that. It's a really intellectual, kind of weird idea that I do not think would ever work in a movie because it's too complicated. Yeah. And I think the new Star Trek reboot stuff, they're fine. They're kind of like fun little action movies.
Yeah.
But
this is a very, very different Star Trek, isn't it? Like in terms of like the movies and things like that, because there wasn't like a big thing of like, oh, we'll end the show with some sort of huge space battle. Like there was that little bit where the Enterprise showed up and like blew up that one Klingon ship.
Yeah, well.
But in the end, like you say, the answer was teamwork and trust and sacrifice and all that good stuff, which is sort of like the first episode was the same sort of thing where it's like the answer wasn't we had to blow everything up. The answer was you had to take a step back and just think and work it out. And I think obviously that's a fantastic message.
Yeah. So that's a good little connection between the two of them. And even with all the nonsense that sometimes happened over the course of the seasons, I think that's a really good way to end it. And I've seen the other series finales. I think this is the best one.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've seen them or not.
I haven't.
I think the Deep Space Nine one is decent. It's not. I feel like there's some pieces that don't work as well. I think the Voyager one is fine, but I've had disagreements with people about it, but I think that the specific plot is kind of stupid of how they actually resolve the ending. And I had heard about the ending of Enterprise as being kind of like a thumb in the face of Star Trek fans, so I was like, oh, let me watch it. And I did, and I was like, yeah, this is pretty bad. So,
I think I did hear about that, because isn't it the final episode of Enterprise is like a holodeck thing, or there's like a simulation or something, or...
It's like Riker and Troy watching stuff, and it was not good. Oh, yeah, no. As much as it was like, oh, hey, here they are. Just I don't know. I actually heard that the later seasons were not as bad, which I guess follows a little bit. Yeah. Meaning, because Next Generation took a little while to get going, although DS9 and Voyager took less time. Yeah. But because of that, you would think Enterprise wouldn't take as long. I think part of the problem with Enterprise is that they were trying to get very adult, but they were doing adult in the way a teenager would think about it.
Right.
And, it's like, let's just have more partial nudity. That's gonna bring in the viewers. And it's just and it's like, people, there's a lot of stuff on the internet these days, and I don't know. Adult, it doesn't have to just be stupidity, in that way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that's what happened, and I don't know. I never actually watched the third or the fourth seasons of Enterprise, so maybe they weren't so bad. I actually did see. I only saw there was a Mirror Universe episode in the fourth season of Enterprise, which I saw, which was kind of fun in a campy way. There's in the original series, there was an episode called Mirror Mirror, where they go to the evil version,
and they've all got goatees.
Yeah, exactly. Which is where that came from, the evil. Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Next Generation never did anything with that, although there was one novel that I read that was not, I guess, canonical. And Deep Space Nine did a couple things with the Mirror Universe. But in an Enterprise, they had something where there's some kind of weird time travel thing where they found a future Earth space, and they used it to take over the past version of Starfleet. Because Enterprise takes place before the original series. And,
of course,
in the kind of silly, campy way, in that everyone's just vamping it up to be we're evil. That was kind of fun, but I mean, I was maybe if the entire show was this kind of stupid thing, maybe it would have been all right just in what it was, but it was, the problem is that the characters, I just got so sick of them so early, and I just found, some of them were decent, but, the captain was, sanctimonious and a pain. The engineer was an asshole. T'Pol, who was the Vulcan, was given just a bunch of stupid sexual stuff to do constantly.
Right.
And her character was just really badly written. So I don't really blame the actress for that, because she probably was oh hey, I'll be the new cool chick. I mean, people still like 7 of 9 from Voyager.
Of course, yeah.
And I think, she did a good job. I think that character was written well. And even if there was a lot of cheesecake elements to it, especially in the beginning, I think, that one held up a lot better. And I feel like they just took the wrong lesson from the popularity of that character, because just being hot is not enough to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no, definitely not in Star Trek.
yeah, I mean, yeah, they often have attractive people on these shows, and that's fine. That's not really
Yeah.
a problem. I think you just need to have more than that. And I think the truth is, I think that Next Generation was really good for that kind of thing. I think that in general, I really still like the series a lot. There are some episodes I can like rewatch over and over again. There are definitely some episodes I've seen once and I say, okay, well, no, I'm glad that's over with.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, obviously there's 178 episodes, but so there's going to be hits and miss. But I definitely think one thing I've always read about Next Generation is it's a great one to sort of dip in and out of. Like if there's just an episode on
Mm-hmm.
TV, you can just sit and watch it, and there's a 60-40 chance that it's going to be good. Because they do have a lot of like
Yeah.
crazy like holodeck episodes and stuff like that. The kind of like Picard's redoing the Maltese Falcon, or it's a cowboy episode
Yeah.
or stuff like that. And they,
Yeah, there's
if you just
definitely
want 45 minutes,
some
if you just
better
like
than others for
killing
that, for
time
sure.
and you just want some like solidly entertaining thing, I have always read that Next Generation's great for that. Like it's one of those shows that it's like in big. You can
Yeah.
just do a nice bite-sized chunk. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's good.
Hey, listen,
Which is really good.
if you can have like an episode where the hologram Moriarty
Yeah,
comes to life and tries and like it tricks the the crew into like taking over. That was like Inception before it was Inception. It was like there was a hologram inside of a hologram, and it was like a whole thing.
yes.
Yeah, that was I always like that episode. That was a fun one.
Yeah, I remember seeing one where something happens and Picard gets turned into a kid. Like, brilliant.
Yeah, some people don't like that episode, but I kind of enjoyed it. There was like that was the one where like Guinan and Ro Lauren and I think it was Keiko and also Picard. And Picard is like he's trying to like be the serious kid. He's like I know I'm a kid, but I'm still the captain.
See that? I mean, that's goofy and everything, but I don't know. I think there is a space for that. Like, I remember, I for some reason, I just remember that one thing with that where I think that they're pretending that Riker is Picard's dad. And I
Right.
do remember a thing where Picard says to Riker, "Oh, go check this out, number one." And like the baddies look at him and he goes, "He's my number one dad." That line is always stuck in my head. It's just like, I'm intrigued to see if that's any good.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
I
But
think
there was also, I remember an episode where there was like, they had like Picard doing like a Die Hard thing in the Enterprise. Like they're doing the Barian sweep and they're cleaning the ship. And he's just going around just like fucking people up. Like that episode was amazing.
Yeah, there were some fun, action things over the course of the series, too, for sure. I think, even sometimes you would just get into like interesting existential ones. Like there was the
Yeah.
one about where Picard lives out an entire life because this like weird alien satellite like captures his mind, and he essentially lives out decades of life before getting released. So it's like a weird thing, just like he lived out this entire existence. And
Wow.
it's called The Inner Light. And if someone hasn't seen it, I don't want to give away the ending because it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And they also did little things where they would bring on some people of some of the original series. There was
Yeah.
one where called Relics, where they brought on Scotty, who had been like stuck in a transporter pattern, so he hadn't aged. He was like, he was an older guy, but he wasn't ancient.
Yeah.
And there was
Like
some interesting
McCoy.
Yeah,
First
exactly.
episode.
So they had something where Scotty and Geordi have to like use engineering stuff to save the day, and there was like a little.
Cool.
I remember there was a great little line in that episode where he's like, "Oh, so laddie, what do you think?" He's like, "So I heard you tell the captain." He's like, "It's going to take you an hour to fix that." He's like, "How long is it really going to take you?" Like, it's an hour. He's like, "What? Oh, they're not going to think. How are they going to think of you as like a miracle worker if you just tell them the truth?" Yeah, so there were always those little things, and I think even if there were pieces that don't work as well, and it's like, oh, it would have been nice if they could have done this or that or improved this or that, and there's definitely some episodes that are a little bit more problematic,
Yeah.
even at the time were considered sexist or racist.
No,
I think in general, I really think this is like, it was a really good show and progressive in a lot of ways, and it helped pave the way for further incarnations of that. We're gonna get a new Star Trek series
yeah,
theoretically, barring delays this year, and
yeah.
I hope that it continues that kind of like, all right, we're gonna tell interesting stories here, and it's not just gonna be about let's do a bunch of adult nonsense. You don't need to have people mucking around like teenagers to be
Yeah.
good. That's my hope anyway.
Yeah, no, and I think that's spot on, that idea of like what a teenager would think grown ups is, or what they think adult is. I think that's a very interesting concept, like in terms of like with it like Enterprise and stuff. No, that's interesting. But no, I have high hopes. The cast for is it because it's Star Trek Discovery?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, the cast look really interesting, and I think Brian Fuller's not as involved as I think initially thought, but Brian Fuller's
Yeah.
always good for something. But yeah, no, I think it would be really cool to have a Star Trek on TV that was good. I mean, watching these two episodes this week, yeah, I think this seems like a really good show just to have on Netflix. Like it's the same. It reminds me of like X-Files, when X-Files came on Netflix, where you can just sort of be like, go online. Oh, what's a good episode to watch? And it's like, oh, if you want a comedy episode, you should watch this one. If you want a scary one, and you can just dip in and out and just get. Because what I want to do, which I never saw, was the Best of Both Worlds with Picard and the Borg.
Yes.
I'd never seen that before. Like I'd always heard about it and I knew about it, just generally operating in geeky circles.
Of course.
But now I think I might actually, I've got a bit of time, sit and watch it and try and watch the second episode, and then watch First Contact. Make a nice run of it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't think the movies are the best you're going to find out there, but I think they're fine.
Yeah.
Generations, I think, is a little underrated. People hate on it an awful lot. And I don't know. I enjoyed a lot of it, but they're definitely it's not the best, but I thought there were some decent pieces to it. First Contact was more a little action oriented, but a decent version of that. The next one, Insurrection, was kind of like a C episode of the series.
Okay, yeah.
Meaning, like, if it had been one of the episodes, I think you'd be like, that's fine. The problem is, as a
Yeah.
movie, you're like, come on. You could have done a lot more with it. And Nemesis was just, trash.
Yeah, Nemesis is trash.
So
Yeah, I think there is that interesting thing. Like, I had this. Like, I'm a big fan of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and again on Netflix, and I got really hooked on that. And because that show is so good, I now look at the Star Wars prequels as just being like shitty episodes of the TV show. So it's fine.
well, that's
A crap TV show episode is fine because you just watch the next one. Whereas a movie, it kind of like you say, a movie, you watch it and you're like, oh, well, we're not going to see anything better now for 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. I was like, Phantom Menace was just like a really shit two-parter of Clone Wars. Don't worry about it. Next episode.
Well, I guess if you put it that way, it's not nearly as bad. But listen, that's a beautiful world to live in.
Yeah, that's it. That's the dream. That's why I'm deluding myself. Oh well, does the job. Okay, so anything else to add about these two episodes, or just Next Generation in general?
I feel like I've covered all the the main points. I'm sure I could talk about more episodes for hours, but my voice will eventually give out. So I think it's a good place to end it for me.
Definitely. Okay, well, Jeremy, where can people find you on the internet?
So I write movie reviews at Hotchka, HOTCHKA.com. And I also run a podcast called Nerd Punches Nerd. And it's on YouTube, although we also have our website, which is nerdpunchesnerd.com as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as always with me, you can find us on Twitter at firsttolastpod, or email me directly at fromfirstlastpodcast@gmail.com. think of a show that you'd like to do and get in touch. Jeremy, literally, we're friends on Twitter, or I think he befriended me on Twitter, sent me a message and said, has anyone done Star Trek The Next Generation? I said no. He said, can I? I said yes, and here we are. So it's that easy. Feel free to get in touch. There's still loads of shows to do. There's still at least 4 other Star Treks that need to be done. So if Jeremy doesn't want to come back and keep doing Star Treks, they're in the open if you want them. So yeah, so Jeremy, thank you for coming on. This has been really good.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. Okay, well, my name is Sean Fallon. This has been From First to Last. Goodbye.